Hey friends, you're in for such a treat today because we are bringing on my new friend, Sarah Levy, whose memoir, Drinking Games, hits shelves on January 3rd, 2023. I'm not going to say if, because you enjoy this podcast and you resonate with my story, I know 100% you'll resonate with Sarah's. I am not even finished with this book yet. And I can tell you that she and I have a lot of crossover, to the point that I told her that a younger version of me would have looked at the table of contents of her book and freaked out a little bit because there is so much overlap in our way of thinking. So I know that you are going to enjoy and learn a lot from this conversation with Sarah. I know you're going to want to rush out and buy her memoir, Drinking Games. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Sarah formally. Sarah Levy is a writer based in Los Angeles by way of New York. Her work examines the intersection of sobriety, relationships, and identity, and has been featured in the New York Times, New York Magazine's The Cut, Cosmopolitan, Glamour, Vogue, Elle, and other publications. She holds a BA in Literary Arts from Brown University. Drinking Games is her first book. I hope you all enjoy this conversation with the amazing Sarah Levy. All right, welcome back to another episode of Unbottled Potential. I am super excited today because I want to introduce you to my new friend, Sarah. She is just releasing her book, Drinking Games. It's a memoir, and we're going to talk a little bit today about her experience going alcohol-free and everything that led up to that. So Sarah, so glad to have you here today. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yes. So I think that one of the coolest things about reading a memoir like this is that, especially in a time where sobriety is just starting to kind of get its feet in more popular culture as something that anyone can do, is I saw so much of my story in your story. As I'm reading through the first couple of chapters, I'm just like, yes, that was me. That was me. And I think it does two things for us. It reminds us that we're not alone. Like, there are so many people out there having the exact same experience. So in those moments when we are in our deepest freakouts, feeling like we are the weirdo that is the only one experiencing this, it really just shines light to, hey, there's other people who are doing this exact same thing. And it also brings importance to sharing our stories so that other people can see us or see our reflections back and forth. And really just kind of normalize this sobriety conversation. So I know that you didn't have that luxury when you were on your own path, because you and I kind of started out around the same time, it seems. So could you give us a rundown of your journey with alcohol and how you got to the point of deciding to call it quits?
Definitely. And yes, I completely agree with everything you just said. It's amazing seeing the landscape in 2022 going into early 2023 when this will be coming out, when the book comes out, and just seeing all the resources that are available online about sobriety and all different influencers and writers and just people who have shared their experience with sober curiosity or alcohol. That did not exist when I first started contemplating sobriety. And a little bit about my journey with alcohol, which is not that interesting or special, honestly. I think it's pretty similar to a lot of people's stories. But, I started drinking when I was towards the end of high school, and I was a bit of a late bloomer, honestly. I was a good kid. I was a rule follower, a perfectionist. I was kind of scared of alcohol and didn't really like the idea of being out of control because I had been so in control in so many areas of my life for, so long. And that was how I felt safe, like getting good grades and having my body look a certain way, and was really rigid with food and exercise. But when I drank for the first time, I really loved it. I loved the effect produced by alcohol. I felt funnier, prettier, like all the things, smarter, all the insecurities that were always kind of swirling in my head were just quieted when I drank. And it really felt like magic. I just loved it. And I was a blackout drinker pretty early on. So what that means for anyone who, I'm sure if you're listening to this, you know what a blackout is, but I'm always surprised by how many people don't know what blackouts are and think it's the same thing as just kind of passing out and falling asleep. So, a blackout is you appear to be awake, the lights are on, your eyes are open, you're having conversations with people, but you're not forming short-term memories, or you're not retaining memories of what's actually happening. And when you come out of the blackout, for me, it would usually be when I woke up the next morning, I would have no memory of that, 5 6-hour stretch in
Mm-hmm.
between when the blackout had kicked in. And that was my experience drinking from a really early age. Was I would drink kind of in excess because I loved the effect and I wanted
Mm-hmm.
more and more and more. And then at a certain point in the night, I would black out and wake up the next morning. And, I felt shame and I felt like I knew that there was something unusual about that relationship with alcohol, but it was also very normalized for me. And I went to college and, drank with my friends and had a boyfriend and drank a lot with him. And it was fun. And that was what was confusing for so long, was that I really enjoyed drinking. Like
Mm-hmm.
it became a big part of my identity. I loved to party. I loved to go out and have fun. I wouldn't have kept doing it for so long if it had always been horrible. And in a lot of ways, it helped me. Like, it really helped me to relax. It helped me to kind of, like I said, I was wound very tight, kind of
Mm-hmm.
growing up, and was very rigid. And it helped me to kind of relax. And I had struggled with an eating disorder. And when I was drinking, like, I would eat pizza at the end of the night, or, right, it helped me sort of redefine my relationship with food and make friends. And so in a lot of ways, it was a positive relationship until it started to turn and the blackouts became scarier. And I first started contemplating not sobriety, but I guess what you would call now sober curiosity, right? Like cutting back and moderating my drinking when I was 23. I had moved to New York City out of college, and it just was getting a little bit, my drinking was getting a little bit messier and a little bit scarier. And
Mm-hmm.
in college, I had been kind of surrounded by friends all the time, and the bars closed at 2 o'clock in the morning, and you kind of had to be like shuttered back to your dorm. And it was a little bit of a bubble. And in the city, things stayed open all night, and I could just keep drinking. And, I found new friends who were happy to stay out all night with me, and was just waking up in various states, in different people's apartments, and just really hungover. And I ended up getting injured. I hurt my arm. I fell out of a cab. I read about this in Drinking Games. I fell out of a taxi and I woke up in the emergency room the next morning, and I had stitches in my arm, and I didn't remember anything about how I'd gotten there. And it was the first time that I was like, whoa, this is scary. And maybe I should cut back on the drinking. But I really wasn't ready. And I couldn't imagine, I was so young. I was single. I had just moved to the city. I couldn't imagine my life without alcohol. And what I think, is so amazing about what we were just talking about, with sobriety being a bigger part of, our collective vocabulary now, is that I think there are more options, and people are getting sober younger and younger because they see it presented to them as,
Mm-hmm.
a viable way to live, and you can still have fun. But I didn't have that at the time. I
Yeah.
didn't know anyone who was sober. I just
Mm-mm.
really thought if I stopped drinking, my life would be over. And so I just was desperate to make it work. I was really desperate to figure out a way to keep drinking. Didn't want to keep waking up in the hospital, but just wanted to keep drinking so that I could have fun and go out and, meet guys, um, and make it work. And I spent the next 5 years just really in like a very painful state of like clenching, just holding on so tight, trying to control, trying to figure out how to make it work, trying to count my drinks, making rules for myself, blacking out, just more of the same, right? And it was a few days after my 28th birthday that I decided, I woke up yet again, hungover, had blacked out. I read about it, the last night I drank in the book. It was nothing really out of the ordinary. It was more of the same, but I just woke up the next morning and I was just done. Like, I was
Mm-hmm.
just so sick and tired of being sick and tired, of
Mm-hmm.
waking up with the dread and the shame and picking up my phone and being like, oh God, who did I text and who's mad at me and what happened last night, and hating myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just desperate enough to give sobriety a try. And that was a little over 5 years ago.
Yeah. And this is, I think that's so, thank you, first of all, for just sharing the lineage of that story, because it truly, I mean, I could look at my story and almost copy and paste down to the years and the experiences and the stories. And again, just like normalizing the conversation. But what is also so fascinating is that, you were in New York for most of this, right?
Yes.
is that of anyone, you know, the people who were kind of talking about sobriety from a more open space in that time were Ruby Warrington and Biet Simkin, and they were in New York, right? So it's like the one option for you is like dangled under your nose, and still yet as a savvy, resourceful woman looking for resources, you still couldn't find it. And
Totally.
yeah, so just again, so important that we are all showing up and sharing and normalizing this conversation just as you're doing right now, so that when someone like a younger you or me is out feeling lonely, feeling desperate, that there's another solution out there for them. So just thank you so much for the writing and the work that you're doing, because I know that people are finding it and it's giving them like a hope and a path forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for saying that. And yeah, I felt so alone. Like I just
Mhm.
remember that feeling of lying in my bed, scrolling on my phone, and I would Google like sober celebrities, or I would look on Instagram and type in sober and look through like the hashtag, which I don't even think people use hashtags anymore. But, you know, I remember feeling like I'm the only person with my story who has ever felt this way. I could
Mhm.
find examples of other people who had sort of this messy rock bottom and had these really severe, but in my mind, like much more severe consequences than I had had, who
Yeah.
had to get sober.
Mhm.
And in my head, like I just had this really outdated idea about what it meant to have a drinking problem, alcoholism, sobriety, all of those things. And that is why I started to do this work and to write about being sober. And
Mhm.
I didn't start doing it until I had been sober for a year,
Mhm.
because I was still, that shame really carried over into sobriety for me. And I kept it a secret and I was really embarrassed about it.
Mhm.
But ultimately, why I decided to start writing about it was because I remembered that shame and that feeling of being so unsure of how I was ever going to get out of that hole, and just feeling really alone in it at the same time. And then, of course, as you know, once I did get sober, my life got so much better
Yeah.
and in ways I could never have imagined. But when you're in it, it's really hard to believe that that exists for you, right? Because I felt
Totally.
very like terminally unique. I was like, I'm the
Mhm.
only person who feels this way. And because I had a job and I had friends and I had an apartment, and like you said, I was living in New York City, I had this false impression that those things meant that I didn't qualify to get
Yeah.
sober.
Yeah.
It's like
Well,
we
and
have this
you,
idea that it has to get so bad for us to be able to make a change, right? And it's like you can just want to make a change. It can be bad enough, right? The bottom can be when you stop digging.
yeah. And you talk about that in one of your chapters about kind of sobriety needing a little bit of a rebrand. So do you want to share a little bit kind of on your philosophy for what you learned and what you now believe about sobriety?
Yeah, I think that the rebrand, the makeover, I think it's happening and it's amazing to see. Essentially, I feel like we have this collective image in our minds of what it means to have a drinking problem
Mhm.
or to be an addict or an alcoholic. And the language, the labels that we use, I think have a really strong negative connotation.
Mhm.
And, I remember talking to a friend, a girlfriend in early recovery about the fact that I was newly sober, and she is not sober. She didn't have much experience with sober people. And she very thoughtfully said, there's been such a shift happening with mental health and conversations around sexual assault. And we really are developing this understanding of the fact that it's not what we always thought it was, right? Like
Mhm.
depression isn't just, oh, smile more, like try to be happy and you'll feel better. We have a collective understanding now of how complex mental health is and how it can look different. And right, it's okay to not be okay. And she was like, it feels like the same could be said for having a drinking problem, that maybe it's
Mhm.
not so black and white. And it was such a light bulb moment for me, where up until that point, I had still been operating with this shame of, okay, yes, I need to be sober. And yes, I'm feeling better, but I still can't tell anyone because people will still think of it as a weakness. Or,
Mhm.
what if it impacts my ability to get a job to get a better job or to get a promotion or to advance in my career? Or what if someone won't want to date me because I'm sober? Or what will their family think of me? Like I still had these really strong beliefs about what being
Mhm.
sober meant. And I also think that the image that we have been fed of recovery rooms and 12-step programs in TV and movies is very bleak. It's like
Mhm.
a basement with a lot of people who are really down on their luck and scrappy. And, those rooms do exist. Like, sure, it looks different for everyone. But I felt like there was no one talking about the other side of what it can look like, which is, you know, really successful people who on the outside might appear happy, might appear to have the job, the family, the success, right? Just you can have everything and still develop a dependence on a substance, right? Still
Mhm.
develop alcohol use disorder, or still become addicted to a drug, and still qualify for sobriety. And I think that, you know, what I write about in the book is this idea of shifting our understanding of what it means to be sober. And I think in sharing my own story, which is all I can do really, right? I'm not
Mhm.
a spokesperson for sobriety as a movement, but just in sharing my story of this is what it looked like for me. This is where I was at. On paper, it looked like everything was perfect, right? On
Mhm.
social media, it looked like everything was great, but it wasn't. I was having a really hard time. And once I kind of got over myself, got over my ego, and gave sobriety a chance, I started to feel a lot better. And I
Mhm.
wish I had known that before. And that's why I'm open now. That's why I've shared my story in my writing and in this book. And I just hope that the movement kind of continues and that sobriety becomes as accessible as, therapy has become, right? We used to
Mhm.
think like
Mhm.
it was really embarrassing to be in therapy. I remember being in college and like having therapy and lying about where I was going. I would be
Me
like, oh,
too.
I'm going to the gym. And it's
Uh-huh.
like, no, I was going to therapy. And I was really embarrassed about it. And I think now people are so open about having therapy and talk
Yeah.
about mental health. Like it's, like it is going to the gym. And so I hope that in the next, few years, we are in the same place with sobriety. And it's not to say that everyone needs to be open about their story, because it's private, right? It is
Mhm.
12-step programs are anonymous. Like I think that there is a lot about that that's important to protect and preserve.
Totally.
But in general, I think just breaking the stigma around having some sort of a problem with drugs and alcohol, that like there's a lot of work that can continue to be done there.
Yeah, absolutely. And even just broadening the conversation, one of the things I always say is you don't have to have a problem, and breaking the stigma around like that is not the prerequisite to quit drinking. You can just know that it's holding you back and that you want to live a better life. And I think we're getting there. I think that the more that we all speak up and share and normalize that, it will become oh, hey, this is just another thing like being gluten free or vegan or whatever lifestyle choice that you make because you want to. It's beginning to get there. Totally.
I
Well,
agree.
well, you mentioned sober dating as one of the things that you were super intimidated by. And I loved reading some of the stories of your progression as a young single woman living alcohol free. And that's something that, I've been single most of my sober journey, and it's something that people come to me a lot about. So I know that everyone listening who is on the journey of trying to find their partner and feeling pretty intimidated because dating is equivalent to meeting for drinks in our society. So can you give us some of your experiences, maybe share some fun stories? And oh my gosh, there's like a flyer or something right in front of me. Sorry. There, share some experiences in your sober dating and some of the things you learned and how you kind of evolved on that path.
Yeah, absolutely. I think most of my interactions with men, dating, flirting, otherwise, starting end of high school, college, in my 20s, involved alcohol, right? And it's really interesting to think about because theoretically, like the point of dating, like you said, is to find your partner. Like, sure, we want to meet a lot of different people and get to know ourselves through the process of dating. But for me, I was really interested in forming authentic connections with people. And when I drank, I was a less authentic version of myself, And so it was interesting that that was what I picked up for so many years as a way to feel less inhibited and to feel like I could flirt and connect with men, because it was actually keeping me disconnected from myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I got sober, I pretty quickly started to feel better. Just, I felt better in my own skin. I felt like physically I looked better. I was sleeping better. I felt less anxious. And that confidence didn't carry over into my dating life right away.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I really kept the two separate. Like I was like very happy to not be hungover and felt really good in the decision to not drink, but I was mainly so afraid of sharing that and of like bringing that into my dates. And so the first few sober dates I went on, I just tried to kind of hide it. Like I wasn't open about the fact that I wasn't drinking. I sort of like made excuses. I was like, oh, I'm doing a cleanse, or which is fine. You can say whatever you want to say. But for me, like I felt uncomfortable. And that I think came across pretty,
Mm-hmm.
guys would be like, what? Or I remember I write about this in the book, like, going on one of my first sober dates and just being like, oh, I've just been really hungover from drinking, and like kind of just saying a bunch of different excuses. And he was like, okay, so like let's just drink sangria. Like we don't have to go crazy tonight. Like just let's just we were at like a tapas like restaurant. And I was like, no, I'm not drinking at all. And it was just really awkward, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's like at the end of the day, like we're all just attracted to confidence, and I think the biggest piece of advice that I always give now when people ask me about sober dating is just like fake it, fake being confident in it,
Mm-hmm.
even if you're not. And you don't have to go into your life story, like I think it's just so attractive to be like, yeah, I don't drink. It wasn't working for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what do you like to do for fun? Like, keep the conversation going.
Yeah, that
It
doesn't
doesn't
have to be the
have to be.
kill.
Yeah. But I was just so uncomfortable. And so I would just get really like tripped up over it. I would be on a date and be
Mm-hmm.
like, well, I guess it all started in high school, and I would be like, why am I like, why am I doing this? And so those first few dates were just like, I had to go through them. I had to kind of like stumble
Mm-hmm.
through it. And over time, I just developed like a method that I kind of stuck to, which was I would tell the person that I didn't drink before we even met in person.
Mm-hmm.
I often was either set up with guys like through friends or would match on dating apps. And so I started telling people before we even met in person just to like get it out of the way.
Yeah.
And that just worked better for me. And so some guys would be like, oh, cool. I've actually been drinking less too. I was shocked at how many people actually didn't care and didn't love to drink. And it was funny to think about what that date would have looked like had I been drinking. Like
Yeah.
I would have been the one being like, I'll have a third glass of wine. And they would probably have been nursing one or two. But in my
Mm-hmm.
head, we would have been drinking the same amount. So
Yeah.
being on those dates sober, I was like, huh, not everyone drinks as much as I thought they did. I was the one drinking more.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and, some guys were like, okay, let's just meet for coffee. So I would just establish it up front. And some people had questions, right? A couple of guys like stopped texting me back when I told them that
Mm-hmm.
I didn't drink, which is fine. That's
Mm-hmm.
like great. Let's not waste either of our time.
Yep.
If that's a deal breaker, that's better for me to know now than 3 dates in. Um, and I think that the flip side of it is I was able to figure out that much faster whether or not I liked someone.
Yeah.
I always say this, like when I was drinking, I liked pretty much anyone. And
Mm-hmm.
dating for me was just about like the chase, right? It was like I wanted a guy to give me attention. I wanted to feel validated.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of sad, but a big part of why I drank and why I went out was to get attention from men. Like I
Mm-hmm.
craved that. And the
Yeah.
night would feel like a failure if I didn't go home with a guy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and dating sober, I was sort of like, oh, I actually don't, you're perfectly nice, but I actually don't think that we're compatible.
Mm-hmm.
And so I moved through dates a lot quicker.
Yeah.
And it was also painful when I liked someone and it didn't work out. Like I felt it. I had a couple of things where I liked one person. We went out on a few dates and it didn't work out. And I was like bummed. But I
Mm-hmm.
also hadn't felt that, like really felt that in a long
Yeah.
time. So
Yeah.
it's like the flip side of it is you feel the butterflies, you feel the disappointment, but you're there. Like you're feeling it. You're like really present for it. And so I dated sober for about a year and a half. And then I met my husband, my now
Yes.
husband.
Mm-hmm.
And we have been married for a little over a year now. And that experience was really wild to go through, like falling in love and meeting my partner and being completely present for it all was just such a gift. I
Mm-hmm.
think that, we always talk about my husband and I, we always talk about how if we had met at different times, like we wouldn't have been ready for
Mm-hmm.
each other. Like
Yeah.
I think if I had been set up or met him um when I was drinking, that like we would have had probably really fun first date, but I probably would have gotten really drunk and I don't know if there would have been a second or a third,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. And so I really feel like um all the sober dates and drunk dates, like it was all practice and it was all just really good information that helped me, that really just helped inform like what I was looking for,
Yeah.
and just helped me to like become that much more confident in my own skin for
Mm-hmm.
when I did meet him and I was able to show up for that date, really authentically because I had taken the time to get to know myself, which
Mm-hmm.
it sounds so simple and so cheesy, right? But like
Mm-hmm.
until I did it, until I really just spent time like sober in my own skin, it like with myself in my apartment, like going out less, just figuring out really who I was and what I wanted, I wasn't able to attract, I think, like an authentic partner.
Yeah, yeah, because if you're not being yourself, the strange thing is though, I don't know if you, well, I do. I do know because everyone kind of has this, but do you like reflect on you you got so good at playing this role of this inauthentic character that you were that you barely even knew that you were doing it yourself. And that's this messed up pattern that we get in where we think, oh yeah, this is who I am, but really it's this like very elaborate character we've created. And no one wants to marry a character. That wouldn't be good for a
Mm,
relationship.
100%. And it's, I look back at pictures from when I was drinking and like I really believed that I was being my authentic self at the
Mm-hmm.
time. I
Mm-hmm.
thought my authentic self was someone who loved to go out and loved to get drunk and had these crazy stories. And yeah, I often felt like anxious and ashamed, but it was just funny and it was just what I was doing, right? I could tell myself these stories and I just believed like this is who I am. And I think that we're very good at lying to ourselves, but oftentimes I think more people catch on than we probably would like to think. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure that when I was going out with men and getting super drunk, they could tell that something was maybe like a little inauthentic there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I do think that it's interesting to think back to the stories that we would tell ourselves when we were still drinking and how different the reality was.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, I just think like just you being able to meet your partner and find someone who you are authentically attracted to and is attracted to you is such a testament for, and that's in a rather short time period. That's and for having dated, a decade at least before, and then all of a sudden you do this work and your person shows up. I think that that's just a beautiful testament to what can happen when you show up as yourself and you get clear about what you want and you start living as that person.
I completely agree. And I did a lot of work in that year and a half because I really wanted to feel better, and that
Mm-hmm.
really motivated me. And I think I I always wanted to feel good. That's why I
Mm-hmm.
drank, right? I drank because I wanted to feel good. And when I got sober, I just kind of threw myself into recovery because I really wanted to feel good. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember making a list of like all the qualities that I really wanted in a partner. And I write about this in drinking games. Like I went to this really what I thought at the time was a silly workshop on manifestation, but ended up being a life-changing experience because it really helped me to crystallize these ideas that I had in my head, these kind of abstract thoughts of I think this would be nice to have in a partner, or I feel like I might actually want to write. And I didn't really let myself listen to those thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And in that year, and ongoing, like I still continue to do that work, but like I really started to get honest with myself. And a lot of those qualities that I had put down on paper, I recognized in Adam pretty quickly when we met. And so I think, yeah, it in retrospect happened really quickly. And at the time I was just like, okay, I guess this is life. Like this is
Yeah.
the life that I've been missing out on. Like I'm
Yes.
so happy that I get to like be a present participant in it now.
Oh, it's so beautiful. And I just like, for those of you who are listening and like have listened to this podcast for a while, you know what Sarah is just sharing is a great example of how when you stop drinking, you get clarity, right? You are able to clearly see this is what I want in my partner. And you're you also are communicating so much more clearly with the universe that instead of like sending a message through this like half-ass muffled reception, you are clearly saying, this is what I want, universe. And it delivered. You have your person and you put intention to it and you figured out what it is that you want and he's there. Beautiful.
Yeah. I always say to him, I'm like, I manifested you. Like you didn't
Uh-huh.
exist before. You
Mm-hmm.
just poof, came to the universe and I was ready. And
Yeah.
I remember like in early recovery reading about like having a mindset of abundance versus
Mm-hmm.
Scarcity. And
Mm-hmm.
I think I had operated in a scarcity mindset for a long time of feeling like, why do I deserve good things? Why would I deserve this kind of success that I have, that I envision? Not just like professional success, but happiness and peace, right? It just felt like, oh, everyone wants those things and like
Yeah.
get real, you know?
Yeah.
And like to your point, when I stopped drinking, I did get really clear and I did start to feel like, okay, well, this seemed impossible. Like I really couldn't have imagined going a month without drinking, let
Mm-hmm.
alone like 3 months and 6 months and ongoing. And so it was like, okay, well, this impossible feat is possible. So what else is possible,
Yeah.
right? If I really believe and I have a mindset of abundance and I believe like I could write a book or I could find love or I can just find peace, inner peace and love myself, right? Like, why aren't those things possible? And
Mm-hmm.
again, like it just sounds really simple and it is a subtle shift that I think I have to continue tweaking and coming back to like one day at a time and using other tools to help me like stay in that place. But it was a real turning point for me
Mm-hmm.
when I just started to view like my life and kind of the opportunities that I had with a different perspective.
Yeah. Well, speaking of manifesting your dreams and writing a book, tell us, first of all, writing a book is just like the most tremendous therapy anyone can go through. So tell us why you decided this is time. It's time for me to write and share in a book and just share anything that you would like in terms of, why this book is so important to you and to the reader.
So I had always wanted to write a book. I love books. I was an avid reader growing up. I was an English major in college, and writing was always how I made sense of
Mm-hmm.
the world around me. And I journaled. I kept journals since I was 8. I had like a stack of notebooks in my parents' house, and that was just where I felt like the closest to my authentic self. And was like on the page. And what's interesting is as I started to drink more and more, I found myself journaling less. And I think I have like one journal that's like half filled in from college, and I had been always just writing, writing, writing. And I kind of got away from that practice towards the end of my drinking. And so when I got sober, one of the things I picked back up was journaling, and it was
Mm-hmm.
really therapeutic. And I was just experiencing a lot of firsts and a lot of new emotions, dating and just everything, navigating my job and being in New York City and just being a 28-year-old feeling like a teenager inside. And
Mm-hmm.
there was so much there. And like we were talking about in the beginning of our conversation, I felt like there was just a real space and an opportunity to share my story, right? And a real um, gap that I had been looking everywhere for a book like this when I
Mm-hmm.
was struggling with drinking. And there are some incredible addiction memoirs and books that
Mm-hmm.
I read and books that helped me when I was struggling. But I think what I was looking for, I couldn't find, which was an example, which was like what happened after sobriety? Like, what did
Mm-hmm.
life look like? That was what I was so curious about.
Yeah.
Not just like what the drinking looked like, but what did life look like on the other
Yeah.
side?
Mm-hmm.
And and I again, like I remember thinking like, well, why should I write a book? Like, I don't deserve it, or I don't have all the answers. Like, I'm just at this beginning stage of my journey. And I remember a friend being like, but that's interesting. Like, this
Mm-hmm.
stage of the journey is really interesting, And so I continued journaling and writing, and I was working full time in marketing when I got sober, and I started freelance writing on the side and pitching essays to different publications about different topics related to sobriety. And I wrote an essay for the New York Times about navigating wedding season in my first year sober. I had
Mm-hmm.
like 12 weddings. Like, I had so many weddings, and I
Oh,
was just
wow.
like, how do I do this? Like, and each
Uh-huh.
wedding was different than the last. And the response that I got to some of those early essays was really profound. Like, people from all over the world were reaching out, and young people saying that they really connected to the story and connected to the feelings. And I just felt like I'd always talked about writing a book, and I was like, well, why not now? Right? Like, why not do it? And in 2020, I had been freelancing. I started freelance writing in like 2018, 2019. And in 2020, when we were in quarantine, I just decided, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna write this book. And that was how it came to be.
Yes. Well, I know it is no small feat. So thank you so much for just being brave enough to put it into the world and, to follow that, also just to follow that nudge, because there always is that voice of who am I to do this
Mm-hmm.
thing? And that is just a gift to yourself and a gift to everyone else who gets to enjoy this and read it. So I would love to just share this with everyone. There will be links to pre-order or order, depending upon when you're listening to this. It's out on January 3rd, 23, right? Also, Sarah, I would just love to speak to the theme of this podcast. It's called Unbottled Potential, because I believe that sobriety is just this gateway to achieving potential that you would have to suffer really for as a drinker to get to the levels that you're at. So can you share with us anything else about how, and on any level of your life, being sober has even further opened you up to expressing your fullest potential? It's a
You
curveball
know,
question I'm just throwing in here at the end.
it's a great question. I mean, obviously, like, writing a book has been a lifelong dream, right? To be able
Mm-hmm.
to actualize that potential has felt amazing. But I think that really, like, what I love about being sober is the potential that I get every day to just
Mm-hmm.
really like make the most of today,
Yes.
And um I feel like I just wasted so much time when I was drunk or hungover, like lying on my couch, just feeling awful and feeling really stuck. And I still spend time on my couch. Like, I love to rest and like love
Mm-hmm.
to watch TV and read books. But the difference is like I am actively choosing how to spend that time. And I think, being sober and having the tools that I do now through like therapy and recovery and being like awake for that
Mm-hmm.
is like I can start fresh at any point in the day.
Yeah.
I used to feel like I would get stuck in these cycles that could last like weeks of drinking and then feeling anxious and then drinking because I'm anxious and being hungover and getting in a fight with someone and then dealing with that. And it was just this like sticky web that I was in. And
Mm-hmm.
now it's like, it's clear, like the path is clear. And um, I think that in and of itself is just like limitless potential, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
anything is possible. And I
Yeah.
write about that in the book. It's like, I don't know what comes next, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
in my life, I'm 33 now, and I don't really know what is going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen today. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And it's amazing that I can be present for it. And I think just the ability to like show up for my family, show up for my friends, like the potential to really experience like every day that I have now
Mm-hmm.
is such a gift for me.
Yeah. Oh, so well said. Well, Sarah, tell us where we can find you, where we can order the book. And I know that this is going to resonate with a lot of people who are listening. So where can we catch you online? Give us all the details.
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at Sarah L. Levy. Um, My website is sarahlevy.com, and hang out with me there, hang out with me on TikTok, and same Sarah L. Levy. And you can buy the book January 3rd, wherever books are sold. And send me a message if you like it, if you resonate with it. I always love connecting with other sober, curious people.
Yes, thank you. Please do share, connect with Sarah if this resonated with you, and screenshot and share this episode if she shared something that resonated with you, which I know she will. So thank you so much, Sarah. We're so excited to support you and your book creation that's now being birthed into the world.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. It was so fun talking with you.
All right, we'll talk soon.